Welcome back to the France 24 debate. Part 2, no place in France has come to symbolize the migrant crisis like the shanty town around the northern town of Calais. It's known here as the Jungle, an improvised network of tents and shelters. It's home to some 4,000 asylum seekers, including hundreds of unaccompanied minors. They come from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, even parts of Europe. Often their final destination is Britain, and Calais is just a transit point. The French government wants to tear down the camp, but NGOs say that the government does not have a suitable relocation plan. It also argues the migrants don't want to stay in France. So is France doing everything it can and should for these migrants? Well, we put the question to my guests this evening. Tom Brooks joins us from Durham in the UK. You're a professor of law and government at Durham University. You're also a migration expert. We'll hear from you in just a moment. Nando Sigona is also with us, another migration expert from the University of Birmingham. And of course, it's interesting to have both of you weigh in on this from the UK, because as we just said, most of the migrants that are involved in this story here, they actually want to make it to the UK. They don't want to stay in France, and that is part of the problem. Tom Brooks, the government, first of all, from the French perspective, the government wants to tear down the camp, saying, look, we're going to provide better accommodation, better lodging for these migrants. But the reality is, a lot of these migrants don't want to go into the government's temporary shelters.
Well, that's quite right. So I think that the French government is correct to finally try to do something about this camp, because the conditions that everyone will agree, the conditions are absolutely deplorable, that people are living in, a lot of vulnerable people, a lot of unaccompanied children living in this camp as well. But it's also the case that you have people in this area that don't want to stay in France or continental Europe. They want to make their way to Britain, and this has been a problem for some time in Calais and surrounding areas. Interestingly, I think part of this problem has been this expectation of migrants coming into Europe that once they made it to the EU somewhere, somehow, that they could choose which country they ended up in and made their asylum claim, which they cannot. But it's the failure to communicate this to people has played some part in this problem.
And a lot of people are very disappointed within that migrant population that they can't move on to Britain, some of them taking huge risks, jumping in the back of lorries, trying to get on board a boat, a train, anything that will get them to the UK. Let's talk for a moment, if you will, and let me put this question to Nando Sigona in Birmingham. Let's talk for a moment about the legal aspect of it. Who is obliged to do what? Now, I'm reading that according to European rules, known as Dublin III, unaccompanied minors, and there are several hundred of them in the camp, unaccompanied minors who have family in, for instance, in this case, the UK, their asylum request should be dealt with by Britain, meaning these people who are currently in France, actually, they really need to be handled by Britain. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. However, there are some sort of caveats. One of the key principles that rules the asylum system in Europe, as you say, is the Dublin Regulation 3, established that the first country of transit within the European Union is responsible for the asylum case. However, for minors, there is this different approach, which basically gave a much more relevance to the networks and attachment and the best interest of the child. So in principle, the UK is responsible for the cases of children who have strong connection within UK. However, how do you move from a young person in France into UK is been at the moment under a legal challenge, in the sense that some people will argue that the young person has to apply for asylum in France and then apply for being moved into the UK, while recent cases raised by Citizen UK organization and other civil society organization in Calais have basically tried to argue that the presence as the people don't want to apply for asylum in France, but they are really keen to reach for family members, close family members, and they're extremely vulnerable in Calais, they should be allowed to rejoin their family as soon as possible.
So does that mean it's fair to say that Britain really should be handling these cases, that a number of these people, the minors who have ties in the UK and who are currently in France, those people should be allowed into Britain? Is that what the rules say?
Yeah, they should be allowed. However, how long it takes, the move is basically not so straightforward. What is interesting in this case that was raised recently is that the UK government tried to settle it before it came to a decision, because they wanted to avoid to set a precedent that could be then applied for other young people. The issue in general is that the condition of minors, migrants, especially the unaccompanied one within the European Union, is extremely problematic and cause of concern at the moment.
And I mean, I should point out to viewers right now, this sounds like a debate on rules and legalese, but it has a huge impact on the human beings that are involved. There are minors, a quarter of them in Calais are thought to be under the age of 15. One of them is 7 years old. A 7-year-old who has come from, be it Syria or Iraq or a war-torn part of the world, and who's trying to make it to Britain. Tom Brooks, can you detail for us what the reality is behind those people? Where do they come from and what their journey has been?
Well, I'll say a very quick point about age. As you say, there's a significant number that are under 15 years old, but there's a lot of people whose ages are in dispute as well. So the other side of it is, do they have family members in the UK? If so, are they really minors or not? Because many people may not have papers. So it's a big human tragedy, and it's a real minefield to wade through in terms of this paperwork and rules you've referenced. In terms of where people are coming from, a great many are coming from war-torn regions in particular. So we see significant numbers coming from Syria. We see significant numbers coming from Afghanistan. Still lots coming from Iraq and Libya as well. These aren't the only places, but they still are a major source of why a lot of people are making the risk of going across the sea or trying to cross over by land into the EU.
Now, let's get back to the conundrum facing the French government, which is the French government wants to dismantle the camp. Residents of the city of Calais are not happy to be living close to 4,000 or 5,000 refugees. There have been instances of violence. The government wants to relocate them, rehouse them. NGOs, however, are saying, look, if you dismantle this camp, you're essentially going to make them even more vulnerable and send them somewhere else into the forest. Tom?
So I think, well, there's something to be said for that. So if there's going to be some kind of new place to house everyone, well, then let's see what that facility is like. There's been issues in the past about the facilities available for the processing of migrants who are making claims for asylum before. And so I think that it's right that there is some assurance that that this is going to be okay. I think there's a lot of hesitancy about closing the camp, actually, that despite how unpopular it might be with lots of people, for lots of reasons, many of them very good reasons, it's also going to be a symbolic thing to do. It's become to, as you started at the beginning of the program, it's symbolized, you know, when people talked about the migration crisis, we originally talked about Calais before things became much wider with Greece, Italy, and elsewhere. So I think that there's issues around that for certain. But I think also people have in mind when past camps have been cleared or closed in the past, what we've seen has been some violence by people resisting because they're trying to get across to the UK. And so I think there's a lot of hesitancy about closing these camps. However better the new facilities could be, we still haven't seen them, knowing there's going to be some resistance by people who've struggled, who've sacrificed to make their way across, and you know, may not understand or care to understand the finer points of asylum law. They think, well, I want a new life in Britain. I've escaped something terrible. This isn't why I've come all the way across. And you know, and there's a question about whether or not we're delaying the inevitable. Will there just be a new camp built some other time, some other place?
Nando Sigona, do you think that perhaps the French government, by tearing down this camp, has another objective in mind, which would be to send this strong signal to migrants who are not yet in France and not yet in Calais, and saying, look, don't come here. It's not worth it. We're not going to welcome you, and you're not going to make it to Britain?
I think the issue with Calais is an interesting one, also in terms of the value and the meaning that the place has acquired over time. If you look from the perspective of the French authorities, you know, Calais is actually a fairly small place. You know, obviously there is issues of public health and the conditions are terrible, but the number of people that are actually there is fairly small compared to the number of refugees or people that apply for asylum within France. It's somehow, its value has been amplified by the British media in particular, that in a sense they project the fears of this invasion that never happened in UK, of the arrival of these thousands of people. You know, if you think, even at the moment where the Calais has been more overcrowded, you know, some people said that they reached 6,000 people. 6,000 people is not a big number if you compare to the size and the scale of the refugee crisis we are experiencing. So there is a clearly, I think, from my point of view, an issue of really over-representing the problem that could be solved much more easily. The problem with the kind of measure that have been put in place, there are at least two that I see there. One is that the number of places that have been offered to people are less than the current population of the camp. So a number of people will be put on the street. This is why the Belgian authorities are worried about the people crossing into Belgium. If everyone was offered an alternative place, probably the situation was slightly different.
But Nando, hold on, Nando, let me just interrupt you there for a second. The government doesn't propose to put all the migrants in Calais in its temporary shelter, which is just next to the current camp. They're saying parts of the migrant population will go there, and another part will be dispatched among the dozens of shelters we have across France. Yeah, but the only reason why people are in Calais is because they are hoping to reach the UK. So that's the meaning and the role that the Calais has as a transit place. You know, if I wanted to go to Marseille, I probably would go in the first instance rather than move to the Calais and wait there in those conditions. The kind of area that they are demolishing as well is one of the areas where a community center have been built, the mosque, the church, and so where people are trying to find also a place to find a sense of community within the conditions that are extreme. You know, what they are proposing here is very much a military structure camp, you know, and which basically everyone becomes just a number that is located within a box. Yeah, but as against that, the government says and points out that it has been ordered, in fact, by French courts to create salubrious living conditions for the migrants. And that is why it has set up its temporary shelters. So they're it's essentially created lodgings for people in containers. A lot of people, as we reported earlier here, do not want to go there, but at least the living conditions in terms of salubrity and in terms of health are better than in the middle of the forest.
If this is going to be a short-term solution, the final outcome is the possibility for people to have a safe passage to the UK, especially for young people that may have a connection, then maybe you're right. The concern that I guess migrants may have is that basically the attempt is to relocate them elsewhere, and losing the visibility that Calais gives, they also weaken their political claims to be allowed to reach the UK. So in a sense, the issue is, if this is an attempt to sanitize the issue and make them disappear, not only to provide sort of basic for the basic needs, then this is why I guess why migrants are trying to resist the move.
But I mean, Nando, if I follow your arguments and I understand what you're saying, it sounds, tell me whether you agree with this, and then I'll put this one to you too, Tom. It sounds like the government is in a bit of a catch-22 situation. It's got to, migrants will not want to essentially leave northern France. They want to stay there because for them, it's a transit point towards Britain. And they also don't want to go in the temporary shelters that the government has set up. So, I mean, is there a way out of this for the government?
I guess, the research being carried out here at the University of Birmingham last October showed really clearly that the condition, the public health issues in the camp is very serious and there needs some to be done. So I'm not saying that this is not the case. What I think here is the issue is to the fact that if people are transferred, they may even be accepting to be transferred into this temporary accommodation, but they will still try to make their point through that they can be moved to the UK. So their concern is, especially I guess, for those who are transferred in other parts of France.
Tom Brooks in Durham, essentially the same question to you. What do you do when you are the local authority, when you are the French government, and you have one neighboring country, Britain, that will not allow the migrants in, and you have the migrants who don't want to go anywhere else? What do you do?
Well, it is a difficult situation, which is part of the reason why it has continued for so long. I mean, I think that as we've seen around the Eurotunnel, Britain, when the crisis, as far as there is a crisis between the two countries, was growing with ever more people trying to break across the fence, Britain promised more funding and support. What this meant were higher fences, more security lights, more sniffer dogs, but also meant more money to the French government to help process some of the migrants who are there, to hear their claims for asylum and make some moves on that front. I think that we need to see probably a bit more from Britain on that, so Britain giving some support, both intelligence and financial, to help the French government process people who are there. I think also it's important for the people in the camps to know that the fact that they might get to the UK one way or another doesn't mean they get to stay, that 60% of the asylum claims that are made in Britain have been rejected and people are deported. So it's not quite the panacea people might want. And actually, one way of looking at it could be, the French government is welcome to take my advice on this, they haven't asked me for it, but if they were to process people to help arrange residency for people, if their asylum claims are accepted, they could then begin the pathway to permanent settlement in France, and once they have that, they can go to Britain, to Germany, to Sweden, whenever they want to.
Which is essentially the process that allows them to claim asylum in one country, and if and when they obtain it, they can then travel across the EU. That's what you're saying?
Well, they can also do that, but in having my asylum claim accepted, I can then have a right to work and begin the road to settlement. I can begin showing so many years of residency, starting working in a job. I can begin doing my French lessons and follow the path towards a kind of French citizenship or something like that. If the idea is I want to have a life in Britain, one way is to get to Britain and have my asylum claim heard, but many people have that rejected. Another way of doing it is the long road of accepting the being processed in France, taking a longer view that once I have the right to live and work in France, I will have a right possibly to build on that and have a right to live and work elsewhere in Europe with more security. But there's a very real risk of having the asylum claims rejected.
Nando Sigona in Birmingham, there's one thing we haven't touched on with respect to France's wider policy vis-a-vis migrants. France has actually committed to taking in upwards of 30,000 migrants as part of an EU-wide relocation plan. I understand it hasn't yet fulfilled that commitment.
Well, actually, no countries has fulfilled that commitment yet. I mean, like the one that has got closures they are only covering a very much smaller number. There are a number of issues that have slowed down the process of relocation. Some are depends on the country of origin, and the other one of the country where the person is resident. The other one is depending on the country of destination. Many more places have, while France has not yet sort of fulfilled obligation towards the 30,000 people, has put on offer a sizable number of places. The fact is that the vetting process for accepting the relocated asylum seekers is slow, and also requires quite a long process of investigation about the background of the people, which is actually quite surprising in a sense, because what is happening at the moment that if for example, if you are an Eritrean refugees, asylum seekers in Italy, and you are offered a place to relocate in Sweden, if you go by yourself, you possibly will take 2-3 days to reach Sweden. If you wait for the relocation, this may take months, may take months, and you are not even sure of if in the end you will end up in Sweden. So do you really need to do something about speeding up the process, and also accepting the idea that you cannot apply two different measures. The relocated asylum seekers seems to be vetted to a much more high standard than normal asylum seekers. It's quite unclear why.
All right, Nanda Sagona joining us from Birmingham University. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Tom Brooks, Professor of Law and Government at Durham University. Thank you both for your insights into the migrant crisis in general, and in particular here in France, the case of the jungle, the Calais migrant camp. We'll find out later this week whether the government gets a green light to evacuate hundreds, possibly thousands, of migrants from the southern part of the camp. We'll keep monitoring that here on France 24. Thank you both for joining us on the France 24 debate.
Thank you.
And let's see what social media has to say about the migrants in Calais and government attempts to evacuate part of the camp. James Creedon joins us with Media Watch. Good evening, James.
Hi, Cyril. So, there's a lot of discussion under hashtag Calais, under hashtag Calais Jungle as well, of plans, the potential to dismantle part of this camp. At Calais Solidarity is an association that has been set up in the interests of the migrants at the camp, and that Twitter account relays information about the migrant camp and the plans that you were just talking about in the debate. Here there is a map, and you can see encircled essentially half the camp, the southern part of the so-called jungle, which is the potential eviction zone. We'll have to see, of course, what the decision will be later this week. Also on that Twitter account, they're talking about the appeal judgment being delayed until tomorrow morning. So as you can see, people, if they're using social media, that's one means of keeping up to speed with news regarding Calais with hashtag No Borders. So you can see there, obviously, they're in favour of maintaining the Schengen zone in place, which brings me to this headline in Le Monde, as we've been covering today on France 24, Belgium having re-established border controls out of a fear that this dismantling of the camp will create flows of migrants going across into Belgium. Le Soir, one of the French-speaking papers in Belgium, has been covering this story on its website today as well. Significantly,
what are the red dots?
The red dots are various different points in the camp. Here you have a school, over here you have a mosque, etc. And this is all in the southern part of the camp. If you can see, it sort of correlates with the area to the south of the lake.
And we see how close that is to the road, in fact, and that was important for authorities because they wanted to create a separation between the migrants and the road.
Right. So there is an attempt to familiarise, I guess, people on the website of Le Monde with or Le Soir rather, of the various different flashpoints.
Essentially a town.
It
with
is a town.
communal places.
And you can
school,
see that.
Mosque.
Absolutely. And when you drag the mouse over it, really you get the sense that this is an informal town city that has taken shape there. Now, other associations that have been tweeting as well, Help Refugees UK, you had, various different celebrities attending events there during the week. That is the actor whose name is now escaping me, and that is very unfortunate. But anyway.
Jude Law.
Thank you very much.
I think I recognized him under the beanie hat.
That is Jude Law. In any case, he was there earlier this week and drawing attention to the plight of some of those who, in fact, it appears do have the right to go to the UK. Doctors of the World also tweeting saying approximately 300 lone refugee children at risk of being evicted from the Calais camp. Irresponsible response by the French government. So there is a lot of associations speaking out, denouncing these policies and speaking up in favour of migrants. You also have videos going up online showing the other side of the situation in Calais. Aggressive migrants steal goods from the trucks. Of course, there have been repeated reports of migrants attempting to either board trucks and get over into the UK through the Channel Tunnel, or indeed perhaps other activities as well, stealing food here, according to this particular tweet. Now, one sociologist by the name of Eric Fassin has been interviewed by the Nouvel Observateur. Now, he denounces what he calls a mise en scène, or a sort of a charade by the authorities, which really it's all about the media. It's all about showing that the government is doing something, but in his, according to him, it's simply displacing the problem. These migrants it's not going to resolve the underlying issues. It's simply moving it from one place, the jungle, to another. And
if you close down the camp, of course, they'll have to find another place to sleep. They'll just be somewhere else.
That's right. And so it looks like, I suppose it looks good from the point of view of the government taking action, but really is it resolving the underlying problems? Which brings me to the final tweet, a quote by François Hollande. They always tend to do this, dig out the unhelpful quotes from a few years back. Libération here, putting the French president in a hot spot, where he said, regarding the same question, he said, well, it would mean that there would be fewer people at first in Calais if they do indeed dismantle parts of the camp, but afterwards the same problems will produce the same effects in other, and simply new camps will end up springing up. I'm not sure if the same discourse...
François Hollande was not president yet, of course. He was denouncing similar policies back when he was in the opposition.
That's right. He was, I suppose, he had his opposition hat on at that point, but trying to deal with a difficult problem in the role of in the government's seat, I guess.
James Creedon with social media's take on the migrant crisis and the focal point there in Calais. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you for watching. Do stay tuned to France 24. More news right after this.